Today's topic, I'm sure everybody's aware already, but is managing distributed QA teams. And I want to just say one quick thing about this. This really fits a model where companies may have like centralized QA or test teams or testing center of excellence. This also applies to just agile or even non-agile teams, not even specific to testing, but software development in general. So there's a lot everybody can gain out of the content, I feel like. So I really hope everybody's going to enjoy it. We'll kind of jump right in and talk about this whole concept of managing distributed QA teams or testing or teams standalone or embedded in development. It all really is meant to really enhance how your teams operate with a specific focus to software testing. So let's move on and talk about agenda. So what are we going to talk about? So we'll talk about distributed QA teams, or the concept of software testing in distributed, hybrid, remote. There's a lot of concepts around what that means and kind of define it, at least give my take on it. We'll talk about methods to maximize communication. It's a really big area whenever you have teams distributed, across regions, globally, on-prem, hybrid. It's all different types of work models now. So we'll get into a lot of details around that, kind of give some clarity of how we can really maximize the work model and not really lose communication and kind of have it break down, which is not good. We'll do some deep dive topics. I won't give it away now, but we'll do a couple different focused topic areas that I think that will be high value and hopefully maybe new to some people, maybe not, but we'll touch on those. And just like I do with all my webinars, I think this is my second or third, this is my third one actually, from a TestRail standpoint. I always do something for continuous improvement. So, what takeaways can we do specific to working on teams to improve? And this is a little more geared, driven or kind of focused toward the distributor hybrid work model, but we'll talk about some continuous improvement. And then, like I mentioned, we'll do Q&A using the chat window within Zoom, and I'll go through kind of panel style, and we can actually screen the questions, and I'll answer as many as I can real time. And again, we may provide links and other follow-up kind of materials if if you have any questions related to TestRail or otherwise. So let's get going. If you haven't been on any of our webinars as of recent, I'll do a quick introduction of myself. So my name is Chris Fralia. I'm a solution architect, and generally I say testing advocate on the TestRail platform. I love a lot of community engagement and obviously helping prospective, new, and really anybody, customers at TestRail, and really anybody that likes to do software testing automation. I spent time building, managing teams in the US, working in Canada, Central Europe, Southwest Asia. So a lot of these problems and highlights and tips and tricks that I'm going to talk about are specific to a lot of experiences that I have, successes, areas that we found issues. So a lot of real world kind of background to the content for today. So with that said, we'll get right into the content. You kind of have an idea of what we're going to do and a little bit about me. So we'll first start off and talk about defining distributed QA teams. This really isn't an industry term. I think people kind of know what it is, but I'd like to talk about it because it's going to kind of dovetail into some of the challenges and communication and a couple different nuances. So I've broken this down in a couple different ways. Again, this is my own take on it. I don't know if this is like an industry standard thing, but this is the way I view it based on teams and models that I've worked in. So we'll talk about distributed models first. And what I mean by distributed, I break this down into two ways. I talk hybrid distributed and remote distributed. So when I think about hybrid distributed, this is a team makeup that would include team members that are maybe on-premise and also remote across multiple time zones and regions. And note how I'm saying they may not be specific to a specific time zone or region, but they're just, hybrid distributed, but they may be in an office, but some may be remote, and then they're all distributed amongst that kind of work model. The other side, remote distributed, would be a team makeup that includes team members that are fully remote. So there's no on-premise or maybe not a physical office space, or they don't reside in them across these multiple time zones and regions. And again, these are a little important. It'll kind of dovetail on what I'm going to talk about. So just kind of think about maybe those that work remote, where you fit in on this. And then the other side of it is centralized. So I think remote centralized, and you'll see my map kind of shrinks a little bit, although it can be other areas of the world. You'll see that it's specific to a region. I'm based here in Pennsylvania in the US. It may be different for you, but the idea is centralized remote teams would be made up of team members that are fully remote within the same time zone or region. So an example I mentioned, I'm located in Pennsylvania. Maybe if my other team members are also remote but reside in Ohio or Virginia, I think of like AWS type time zones like USA East, that's East Coast, Eastern Standard Time. That basically would be more of a remote centralized model. Hybrid centralized would be team makeup of team members that are both on premise and remote, but they're also in the same time zone or region similarly. So again, I'm based in Pennsylvania. Maybe we have an office here that is physical. So maybe today I'll go in the office, but I have team members that work remote in Virginia. So that would be like a hybrid centralized model. And again, there's some rhyme and reason why I'm mentioning this. Again, you can think about what kind of distributed team model that you fit in, but these are just kind of the four major ones that I could kind of break up. So with that said, what are some common challenges? So we kind of know some sampling or variety of what the team makeup, how they could be distributed, and what the different work models look like. Let's talk about just generally some challenges, and there's going to be a lot, probably more than I have listed here. But these are some big ones that I've both faced, experienced, and know that teams struggle with. One of the big ones is lack of efficiency and ability to swarm on top priority items. Swarming is more of an agile term, but really the big challenge I've seen and experienced, the team has I'll just give an example, like a hot fix release, for instance. We have to get a patch out by tomorrow. There was a production issue and we've identified it, but we really got to push to get it done. Teams that may work in different regions or are distributed, they're not centralized, or kind of swarming really becomes harder. That cohesiveness is more of a challenge to all swarm on one specific item, maybe due to time zone. So if you think about it, maybe I picked up an item that pairing with the developer, and we're doing testing and rapid development to try to get something out, kicking off a CI/CD pipeline, trying to iterate and get an RC release candidate cut. Maybe we ran into some problems. It's the end of the day. We have to do some handoff for maybe those that are in a different time zone or region. Picking up where we left off or having the team centrally swarm starts to become a real challenge for high priority items, hot fixes. It takes a lot more coordination and communication. We'll talk a little more about that, how we can help kind of facilitate that later slides here. Duplication of SDLC artifacts. This is a really big one with me. Been on a lot of development teams, managed QA teams, and one of the big ones that I've always seen, I'm sure everybody can relate to, is duplication of defects. We have a build that comes out, and we're doing on our CI pipeline, we're rapidly deploying. We find an issue during the day. Maybe we have a team again that's remote distributed, so that's our model kind of globally, right? Or maybe even hybrid, but they're in different work zones or time zones. They go and see the same build we did. Someone doesn't know that a defect was created. Now we have duplicate bugs, duplicate issues. People are opening, duplicate, pull requests or merge requests, depending on what tools you use, to try to address these for both test and development. So coordination and duplication of artifacts can be kind of challenging if we don't have good communication of where things are at, how people are communicating, picking up work, identifying problems. And then the next one kind of falls right in line, but vacant accountability and ownership within the SDLC. I kind of put this quote here. I've really not experienced this a lot in my teams, thankfully, but I know through colleagues or other teams or different organizations, sometimes this is an issue with new teams or teams that are forming or are very segmented. You get that over the fence kind of mentality, and maybe you have or have not experienced it, hopefully not, but one of the examples as well, during the day, my test passed before the code merge. We ran a pipeline branch on a feature branch. We ran a CI pipeline, everything passed, it looked good. And then the next day, well, it was broken. Well, when I ran it, it was fine. The team that came on my time at night must have broken. It's not my fault. Well, that's not really good ownership and accountability, and being distributed or segregated from a work model sometimes doesn't lend itself to the best cohesiveness with the team and these type of kind of mindsets. And then the last one is more specific to Agile, but I've experienced this personally where we've had some issues with velocity and not being predictable. So, the whole idea of teams, was it forming, storming, norming, kind of like, I'm sure I messed up the order of that, but kind of the idea of how teams grow and build as they move on their Agile journey and Agile maturity. I find it a lot harder to get predictable velocity with, different challenges. And like I said, again, kind of the cohesiveness of the team as they're forming and even maturing, whenever they are in this distributed kind of work model. So it's a lot harder, and I've seen that personally. So that's definitely can be a challenge. So is it kind of a dovetail for those that did not hear or participate or see my last webinar, I believe in February, which was testing in regulated industries. We have downloadable links. You can watch the video and the materials. We have a blog post up as well. But I wanted to touch on this because there's really some specifics to regulated industries and remote teams, because this also happens a lot. We have a diverse type of work model for teams that are working in regulated environments. I don't have it on this slide, but I worked in nuclear for a long time. So, this is a power, picture of a power plant. It's actually maybe a fossil plant, but the idea here is that the nuclear industry or regulated environments have specific work model and challenges that we have to think about whenever we're working in these type of environments. So the one thing that I've experienced myself, remote teams that span international borders and boundaries could be subject to different type of compliance standards across various industries. I always say, and again, this is my past webinar, we talked a little bit about having understanding and kind of self-ownership for being aware of what compliance rules are, especially around data and privacy. So these may change based on where you work, where the product's deployed, what type of data you're using. Again, a quick example, I won't go too deep on this, is, for healthcare, us in the United States are bound by HIPAA, within Code of Federal Regulations, and our government defines that for protecting sensitive, PHI, patient health information, and standards and how we use and share that data. That may vary based on country and where you're at, and what regulatory bodies are then overseeing that. So something like that we need to be aware of if we have a team that's spanning international boundaries and working and may have access to that type of data. The second one here is we talk a little bit about more infrastructure and cloud infrastructure. I'm more of an AWS guy. For this, my mind initially talks about like disaster recovery, and can we talk about that around how we set up disaster recovery, replication. For those of you familiar with a little bit of like cloud services and AWS specifically, Amazon has this idea of availability zones and how and where you deploy, or how can you configure actual failover or replication across different availability zones, which again may need to change based on your location, whether it's in the US, or maybe you need to have an environment available or have replication set up for disaster recovery across environments across Europe, different access restrictions. So how you set your environments based on your work model, it may vary. And then the last one here I already talked about, but it's around data access restrictions and specifically for confidential data. And I'll tell a brief story specific to this, and maybe this is something known for those that are working in regulated environments in the call. Maybe this is something that may make you think, which is good. I had a team member a while ago, and he or she, just leave it anonymous at that, but basically would had a need to go internationally due to some family things. They worked here in the US and specifically in the domain of healthcare, and had a requirement of, hey, I need to go back home. I'm leaving the US. And at that point, access to PHI or patient health information was a potential based on how we had environments set up and obviously configured and accessed appropriately. But from a leadership and compliance perspective, the requirement there is we had to regulate and restrict access to any type of real patient health information or environments where that may be accessible via that when that person left basically the US, right? So when we're doing international access, due to privacy and compliance laws specific around PHI, we had to restrict that prior to any type of travel. And then obviously, when they came back, could have access to the environments and the things we were doing for validation, obviously in a controlled way. But think about data restrictions and confidential data specifically when you have teams that span international boundaries, not domestic. It's something that's important and we need to be aware of. So we talked a lot about challenges, talked a lot about considerations. Let's talk a little more about methods to maximize communication, because a lot of the issues that we talked about really come down to communication, right? Communicating where people are working, communicating compliance challenges and requirements, communicating just how the team is working. So let's get into that. So this is a very non-technical thing, and I think it's one of the most important that I talk about actually for any type of distributed or hybrid teams, is a team working agreement. You may call it something different. This is what I've always known it by. I've worked in a lot of teams. It's like common kind of verbiage. A team working agreement basically at a very, low level is an agreed upon set of rules that the team members agree on and abide by. And in most cases, this is not something that the leadership team sets. It's part of how the team grows and matures by defining these, collaboratively of here's how we're going to work. And this could be very simple administrative things, all the way to SDLC related topics, to roles and responsibilities, to how we do approvals, workflows, to, you know, how anything with work is done. So the more that you can define in general is, from my experience, the better, to alleviate vagueness on how the team is meant to operate. Now, you know, we're not writing hundreds of pages in a user manual, but this is a good opportunity to level set with all the members of the team. And what I thought was really helpful when we had this, when new people join the team, this is something they can review and have some very clear expectations on. What is the working agreement for this team that I'm joining or coming into? Some examples, just before I leave this slide, to give you kind of a mental picture what I'm thinking. You may have some ideas as well. Would be capacity planning. We've hit several scenarios where, hey, we have a big release coming, everybody's feeling great. Our product team did scoping, everything was really good. And, you know, where I'm located in the Northeast, we get a lot of rain and not great weather. So, you know, maybe it's summertime and we actually get a really great stint of weather, and we look and say, you know, we're really lagging our velocity and sprints are down and we're really looking at risk. Why are we dragging? Well, half the team was on vacation on and off for several weeks, people taking PTO and not available, and no one really communicated capacity planning. Well, that's a great item for a team working environment to clearly communicate when I'm going to be in and when I'm going to be out. So like, here's my general availability, or I'll set it on a calendar, however you want to do it. Something administrative that's simple like that has impact on the team. So everybody should know when you're available, when you're not going to be around, and do that in conjunction with agile sprint planning, release planning, planning your epics or themes, however you want to align it. That's a great item. And the other thing is roles and responsibilities. I've been on teams where we've had really great, truly awesome developers that say, you know, if the development bandwidth or the engineers are done building things, and QA test engineers are not struggling, but really bogged down writing a lot of automation, or sometimes a small feature change correlates to a ton of automation, maybe more than actually the change itself, that it's basically the commitment of the person that made the change, the actual developer, to then come and help write automation, right? So it's a role responsibility agreement that it just happens. So these are really good to have. I encourage everybody to kind of think about this if you don't have them. We'll talk about that as like continuous improvement at the end. And then the last thing is, it's a living document. So, you know, this should be revisited from a sprint perspective during your retrospective meetings. If you have root cause analysis, which are great. Hey, we had a bad release. We missed some things. How can we update our working agreement? How we set and define work in the team? Definitely something to look at. The next one here is definition of done. I'm not going to go too deep in this. This is more focused for an agile, kind of like an agile environment. But what I would say is have one, and I'll just talk briefly about a do and a don't. What I would do as far as a definition of done, and those real quickly that are not familiar, definition of done is really what we're saying. This is like a checklist or some criteria that's objective. This is what you should do, that defines when a body of work is done. And everybody does this differently. Again, the teams that I've been on, I like to think of it almost like a checklist. You know, the one, you know, from a technical perspective, you know, our CI pipeline is all green, all tests have been run, right? Unit, automation, integration, performance, whatever your team standards need to be or are applicable for that body of work need to be passed. Maybe there's code reviews. We'll get into reviews here in a little bit. And then, you know, maybe we actually have acceptance by either end users, stakeholders, the product team. Someone is actually accepting the body of work. That's a great kind of way to check off the kind of what should you do for done. These are objective, measurable kind of items. What I would have recommend avoiding in this, and this is my don't category, is really subjective or vague requirements. It hurts the team. It's even more confusing when we're working distributed. Maybe we're pushing, you know, work, and you know, the team that's in a different time zone, and you know, from the team that actually developed it is trying to maybe do some acceptance if you work in a product focus role, or facilitating a test role to demo to somebody. And maybe we have, you know, context where, well, a subjective requirement would be, well, the story is done when the user feels it's, you know, usable, or whenever we reach acceptable levels of usability. Well, what's acceptable level of usability? Well, we don't really know. Right? Like, and, you know, that may cause a lot of churn and confusion. And then again, communication breakdowns. We need something really objective to define the definition of done. So I'll leave it at that, but this is obviously, again, becomes more important. We're working hybrid and distributed. It's even harder to kind of reach and communicate with people sometimes. All right, transitioning. This concept, and I'm sure some of you may have heard of it, some maybe not, but this whole idea of shift left from a software testing perspective, we have other blog posts and resources on the TestRail site that you can even dig in if you're curious. For the purposes of this, and I think it's very important for this hybrid or distributed work model, is really trying to front load or do early engagement for considerations, activities, and all things testing or quality in alignment with requirements, design, and development. You'll see kind of the graph here. We're really front loading this thought process for let's build something that's well architected, testable, that we know what the requirements are, and we can start to do rapid iterations of both development and testing almost in parallel to get very early feedback. Again, I've said this several times, but having a team distributed creates more communication gaps. And what we don't want to do, and I've seen unfortunately, is having large chunks of work almost in a waterfall fashion, but it's been an agile, unfortunately, get built without a lot of thought for actually being testable, how we're going to test it, or even whether it's possible to be tested. And then we wait very late in the cycle, and now we're having testing and quality problems, or worst case yet, maybe we're building things that are nearly untestable, endpoints that are restricted, certain designs that may not be leveraged for automation, a very easy one that most people that do UI automation that can relate are really poor or dynamically changing selectors, and it really creates kind of spaghetti when you're trying to do very maintainable and scalable UI automation. So these type of things we should really shift left and identify early, and it's even more important when our teams are kind of scattered across different work models. Okay, so let's do some deep dives. So this is a kind of general kind of lead up. We talked about challenges across some different industries, specific requirements. Kind of my thought on the different types of work models. I'm sure there's more, but you kind of have an idea. Let's deep dive into some specific areas that we can focus on to improve some collaboration, some communication. This one we're going to talk about now is around product, right? Product owners, product managers, those that are more or less the face of the customer, or the role that we would think of traditionally as owning the product or doing acceptance. These type of end user representative, or end users themselves, maybe depends on how you're set up. If you do beta releases or have stakeholder demos, or have a lot of engagement, this is kind of the end user customer facing type of process that we want to think about. And it also is around how we plan work. So me saying that was a good transition to this slide, but one of the big things that I've seen, both having a high amount of success and a lot of challenges as well across multiple teams I've been on, is how we manage QA technical debt. And this is not as customer facing, the point where people are actually using software. This is kind of related to both product ownership, product management, on how we focus efforts for what we're going to prioritize, right? Because that's always part of it. What features do we work? What do users want? What is the team going to put effort to? One of the biggest things, and I feel that really lacks both communication and visibility for effort and focus in the team, is how we tackle QA or test technical debt. So there's a couple of things that I really like to enforce and have seen with great success. One of the big ones is maintaining a backlog. It can be integrated into the main backlog. I've had segregated ones that we use some filters in Jira, specific for testing and quality technical debt. So this can be anything from, get more automated test coverage, to we need to build out a performance testing framework, to some focused security or disaster recovery type testing, broken or flaky tests. We'll talk about that. So having a backlog that reflects work that we need to do outside of let's just test stories and work artifacts that are actively being done in the sprint, whatever you're iterating, maybe on your Kanban board. Let's actually have a focused backlog and prioritize these based on impact and importance to the product. And this is that engagement with the product, kind of product folks in this case. Tracking manual tests that may be candidates for automation or things that we want to automate are a really big thing. If you have a lot of manual tests, it can be okay right now, but long term, it can be very unsustainable if you want to really increase that velocity, get to more of a continuous delivery type model. One of the examples that we use, and I see a lot for like our TestRail customers and people I work with and I've used previously in different tools, is a way to track both what are your automation candidates and then those test cases when they are automated. So having a way to actually manage and track your automation backlog, and then furthermore, how do we reflect the effort to then do that type of automation kind of work down? We have a manual test case. We know we want to automate it. How do we get it automated? Let's create a story or a task. Let's link it to the actual test case. And then when it's automated, we can actually mark and track it. So we know we're not running manual tests when they're now running automatically in a pipeline or maybe locally. This example on the right, you can see is just a screenshot for one of my TestRail sandbox instances. We've added some custom fields so we can highlight whether we have a manual test case, which this is, whether we want to automate it. And then if it has been automated, we can mark that as well. And then I went ahead actually with their Jira integration, and we actually linked the actual Jira artifact that did the automation work to automate the manual test case, linked it and referenced it to the manual test case. So we kind of have full traceability of, when the work was done. We have a work item to get it done. And now we know we have a manual test that may have quality record associated with it. We want to maintain that, but we don't want to run it manually. It's now covered under automation. So we have some tools or a platform to be able to link all that. Even if your team isn't currently using TestRail, these kind of concepts, you can think of ways to how we track and manage that. I'm sure it's like a little bit harder if it's not centralized, but having a process to do that is really, really crucial and provides a lot of visibility to the product and external leadership on what the QA team is doing, right? Hey, we're refactoring all these tests and we're doing all this. What effort is being expended and what are they being reflected against? We should track that with work items, just like application code, cloud engineering and infrastructure changes, everything. So with that kind of said, as far as how we're reflecting and managing work, the one thing, and this is a little controversial, but I've highlighted it in bold and red. I've not done this in all teams, and I think there's a certain time and place, but if your teams are having trouble with this, or the product team or organization is not as willing to think about value for tracking technical debt specifically for testing, I've seen instances where it works really well for visibility, where testing and test artifacts, automation code, performance test frameworks, manual tests, doesn't matter. They're treated the same as application code, right? Like a bug in our application code that affects users versus a bug or a flaky test that doesn't catch another issue in the code that also affects users. So in the end of the day, these are potentially user-facing and impactful, treating them the same. And if we have a flaky test, a broken test, infrastructure that's not working well, just like we would create a defect for an application, there's something in code, maybe there's something wrong in a database migration or a configuration setting, or infrastructure is code, however you manage it, a defect for that should apply the same to tests. We have a flaky test, it's unreliable, and we don't know, and we can't accurately ensure quality on a feature. We create a defect for that. That now is prioritized, and we'll get into defect triage. It's actually we'll transition to here in a minute on how we then prioritize. So it adds visibility, and the product team has something to then look at for impact and priority. So if your team's having problems with doing this, maybe think about, and again, this comes back to our working agreement, how do we treat broken tests, technical debt? This all kind of aligns. But these are some techniques that I've all used and had great success with. So here's defect triage. I kind of gave it away in my last slide, but so defect triage, that those are not aware, I'm sure a lot of the testing QA folks on this call probably have heard it or done it or currently doing it. But defect triage is really a process that we should be conducting with our product team and really just our team in general. You can do like an Amigo style meeting where you have someone from product, engineering, the QA or test team. If you have BAs, business analysts are always a great asset to have as well. And having these regularly to basically review, track, and manage open defects on a product is really critical, because really your bugs are your risks. It's kind of like the risk register for the product. We know all the things that are not working right. So we should be doing this regularly with a lot of engagement in a very streamlined process to be able to basically manage this. One of the things I used for a long time, and I was a Jira user for a long time. That's what the screenshot here is adding a custom field in Jira on a story defect. You can put it on whatever. It mainly applies to defects for triage. is having a triage field. So you can have like a label or checkbox. This is a Jira custom field label that I added. And basically, as you review the list, you can have a query, and you can basically query any defect in the product backlog that does not have a label of triage value yes, or there's checkbox controls. You can set it up however you like. But the idea is I now have a way to query and see all the items that we've not run through, again, through working agreement. What does the triage process look like? We confirm priority, severity, impact of the customer. Everybody agrees on it. And then we can mark a triage, and knowing basically that we've looked at it and the state that it's in has been validated with our stakeholders or our team. It gives you a lot of, concrete way to quantify this and manage it. Also, for tests that have failed, I feel like it's really important to also have the linkage of defects to tests. TestRail, like talk about centralized test management. This is just another area that I think really accentuates that. We basically can centralize defects. Maybe it's an automated test that we automated on a test case, and you can see the screenshot I have below has multiple references. Maybe one of those references is the bug that this test case was created to cover. So having good traceability for defects kind of is level 2 once we do triage in general. Knowing where it came from, what test cases it's linked to, how it was identified, having deep traceability for like your work management, agile kind of management tools, I think is really critical. And then you kind of interweave that with the process like defect triage can really add a lot of effectiveness to teams. And the same thing I've been saying, it really doesn't get any better when you're distributed or hybrid or working in more segregated type environments or work models. So this is a great way to get everybody on the same page. Okay, so we talked a little bit about the product side, technical debt, how to improve communication on that. Let's talk a little more on kind of the QA focus, test engineer role, but it could be development engineering as well, on doing peer reviews. I'm sure everybody's doing this at some level, at least I hope so. This can apply to manual test cases, framework, automated code, unit testing, however you want to treat it. But basically, peer reviews at its lowest level should align with the working agreement. Again, I'm going back to that. What do peer reviews look like? I'll give an example from teams I worked on. Well, I have to have a minimum of one reviewer on any test code or manual test prior to it getting merged or completed before a branch is merged into develop. So meaning we have a feature branch, development teams writing code, or hopefully iterating at the same time, or maybe even doing a little almost TDD kind of thing. We're writing tests as the code's getting written, satisfy requirements. These things should be reviewed, feedback given, and having a test in a final passing state before the stuff is merged. And that's really a big contributor to what I believe is flaky tests. We miss things, we have tests that are wrong, they get merged prematurely, we don't have somebody doing a review, and now we're left with broken and flaky tests that are going to cause us a lot more maintenance and just hard to sustain. So let's do it right the first time, have a process to do reviews. And the process here, my second bullet, should act as a quality gate prior to that test and the feature code that's implementing the actual change, both development, QA, test, framework. Again, it could be performance testing. All of this should be vetted and really have a good quality gate for review prior to being merged, run, and saying that it's ready for acceptance. And again, this gets back to also kind of this whole definition of done. So these type of processes kind of interweave, but we should be thinking about it. And then having a common platform, this is really a facilitator, right? Doing this manually, maybe I do a little in automation, maybe in my GitHub repo, but then I have a separate repo for manual tests. And then, we track some things, just standalone, or maybe I run and build some JMeter suites. We check that in, but there's not a great way to comment on that, or we push results. All these segregated pieces for framework and infrastructure and testing, it's hard to have a kind of a central spot to facilitate reviews. One of the things that TestRail does, and I'm really a huge advocate of on our enterprise version, is this test case review approval kind of cycle where we can set statuses for test cases, do actual like an approval review phase, add comments. You'll see my screenshot at the top. Is like maybe for an exploratory test case. It could be for automation if you integrate into TestRail with our CLI or API to integrate your automated results. You can, interweave that with what you may add comments in GitLab. You can leverage that, the framework in TestRail, once all the tests are integrated. You can also do this for just step-by-step manual tests. Regardless of what you're doing, having a central place to centralize comments and facilitate the process makes it way easier. And it's harder to miss things too. One of the other last things before I move forward, and again, this isn't TestRail specific. You can set this up within your build pipelines, other tools. TestRail has it as well, is some method for notifications. When do I need to action upon this? And this is the kind of side effect, again, of distributed or hybrid teams that are not centralized, is basically it's hard to understand and know when things are completed, right? When is a test case ready for review? Did someone just create a new test case or test run? Can I go and start looking at it? TestRail has this feature or functionality of a webhook, and this is one of the ones I set up for one of our end users. And basically it's something we were talking about. We're doing like a Slack integration, like teams that use Slack, which I personally love. When a test case is created or a test run is completed, maybe we want to go and look at that. It can automatically send a Slack message, and then teams, even if they're in a different time zone or working distributed, can reference that and say, oh, a new test run just got executed, or a new test case has been created. If no one's jumped on it, let me go and review it so we can move it forward. Let's align with our working agreement, get a good review on it, and it helps everybody move forward. So having some centralized tooling with good process is really a sweet spot for high quality tests in reviews. So, okay, kind of pivoting, but going in that direction on the theme of testing and integrating tests and feature changes. We're going to talk a lot about test environment management and some certain things around that, right? And everybody thinks, well, that's pretty easy. We deploy things in the cloud. We just, we go to the build, I validate them, we run our automation against the build once it deploys. Hybrid and distributed teams provide some unique challenges around this that we should be aware of. If the people on the call, I'm sure some of you guys are thinking about or run into this, maybe not, but it's something that we should have awareness for. So let's kind of talk about it. So one of the issues that I think that I've seen more often than not on any of the teams I've been on, that's a pretty consistent, whether we're actually on premise in the same, office, facility, hybrid, doesn't matter, is this idea of maintaining what I call environment claims. That's my own term. If you Google it, you're probably not going to find anything. But really what I mean by environment claims is setting up a definition of claiming, okay? Claiming what environments are used for what purpose on a given development team. We'd say like, why is that critical on a distributed work model or in teams in general? Identifying what environments and how they're used really drives how we do milestone and promotion, almost like washing code with both acceptance, test runs, and leading up to like a regression or maybe hardening period all the way to production. So how we use environments is a pivotal piece and tool that should be injected into our process to ensure we have high quality software being released, hopefully at a pretty continuous pace, right? So defining a purpose for these environments that is very clear in a way we manage it is really critical. This example, this is like a dummy example that we put in, but this is something that I could see a team doing, right? Maybe you have a dev, test, maybe a milestone environment, staging, obviously production, but having an owner, a purpose, and maybe you even have a branch that's deployed and you list a branch. I have seen teams automate this, which is really cool. So the idea here is we maintain this idea of an environment claims page so we know what tests we're running against a deployed, configured environment that should mimic or be very close, if not identical, minus maybe data, to production, to ensure high quality, right? One of the classic examples, hey, I'll deploy and I ran my automation, my build pipeline ran against the test instance and that passed. Well, we went and merged and promoted, maybe we created a release candidate or an RC tag. We went through the milestone branch. We did acceptance testing from our product team. And maybe we forgot to go ahead and deploy it to stage, right? We're getting ready for regression. We're running automation and the stage environment is stale from the last release. And, a lot of our tests are failing. Why are they failing? spend time looking at it. Well, the build wasn't deployed properly. It still has the old code, not the new code. So these type of things can happen in any environment. It happens a lot during the sprint, right? Teams that do agile that may want to rapidly deploy with the pipeline. Maybe, I deploy the pipeline, my tests run, it's a feature branch, but somebody else redeploys, and then I'm running some tests locally. My tests are failing. The pipeline passed. A lot of confusion. Why is this happening? Now we're creating bugs. Well, the reason is that the test that I ran at the given time, the branch wasn't deployed on the test environment, wasn't what I expected, right? So these type of coordination problems can slow a team down. We talked about loss of velocity for agile in an agile workplace. So we want to think about how we manage it. And again, this comes back to working agreements. If I'm deploying a branch, how do I manage it in our pipeline? How do I do it for testing? Do I update an environments page? How do we track and own this across the team, working potentially globally, internationally, across time zones, this mixed environment? So having a way to manage quote unquote environment claims, whatever you want to call it, can really help or hinder the team. So something to think about. The next one here is really kind of driving toward what we talked about, like more of a milestone approach. So I said, you may promote environments, dev, test stage. Maybe there's a milestone every 2 weeks for a sprint or a hardening environment, however you want to do it. The one thing that I think that teams lack visibility of is this matrix on how they track both where they're executing and the configurations, right? Like in a modern, landscape of software development, products have multiple, I'll call interfaces, right? We may have a web app, we may have a mobile app for, iOS or Android. So we have all kinds of different interfaces, browsers, operating systems. Having the ability to track this and know that our tests have been running all through both the milestone promotion cycle of environments, but also across all the configurations, it can be hard. And usually that may be where we find issues. Well, I ran automation on Chrome, but the latest browser version or Safari, it doesn't work. We have a requirement that it's browser agnostic. So it passes on Chrome, fails in Safari. We didn't run it in Safari. Now we have a bug. Or we didn't promote all the tests or all of our environments all the way through the cycle. So we promoted dev to the test environment, and then someone rebased and merged up, and now the milestone environment's broken, but we didn't, or we go to stage, it's broken because we skipped milestone. We would have known at the end of the sprint, but we missed it because we didn't promote all the way up. We didn't run all the tests in all the environments. So these type of issues can be avoided having a good way to track and manage both how you promote and the configurations of all the testing and all the environments all the way through to production release. So have a good process and mechanism to do it. Again, there's some screenshots on TestRail has this really awesome feature that we advocate a lot for to select and define configurations of given tests. And you can do this for manual and automated tests about what browsers, operating systems, you can define them however you want to do multiple configuration, execution, and tracking. And then I added a custom field. You can add to tests or runs that we basically can do. I called it environments executed. These kind of like almost like pills, these little controls, where you can update tests based on where they've been executed in your milestone environment promotion process. So we know a given test has made it all the way up through milestone in the example that I have. We know we haven't missed it. So a little bit of tooling, centralized management along with process goes a long way to ensure that we're really running everything where we should be and at the right time prior to release. So we're kind of tailing off here, and I mentioned at the beginning of this, talking a lot about some tooling and some process. A big one for me, anytime we give these webinars, is continuous improvement. So maybe your teams are doing everything I've talked about, which is great. What ways can we look at to even continuously improve? We always can do better. And this is a little more specific to distributed teams. So I want to talk a little bit about that. So this whole concept, and again, these are terminology I've just always known and used with teams that I've been on and like managed, is this idea of 1+1 meetings. So what does this really mean, right? Well, we have a team retrospective. So if you work in Agile, ideally every 2 weeks or X number of weeks, you do a retrospective for your sprint performance, and it's more team focused. Everybody talks together. For teams that are maybe hybrid or waterfall, maybe you do release-based retrospectives. We had a release. Let's talk about what went good, what went bad, what you can improve on. All these things happen mainly in a team-focused setting. One thing that I find is a lot of times teams can't meet all together, right? Or if it is, it's a hard ask. If we have teams maybe in Asia, India, or even Eastern Europe, and I'm here in Pennsylvania in the U.S. Time zones, you're asking people to not sleep to meet, so it becomes really hard to get the team together all at one place. It may not actually happen. The team may be segregated based on these time zones. So having individual meetings, if you're in a leadership role or lead role, or if you're not, but maybe this is something you want to advocate for, to have a one-on-one meeting at a frequency, maybe it's every 2 weeks, not with the whole team, because we may not be able to engage the whole team altogether. Unfortunate challenge or restriction of kind of the distributed model. But really, these 3 questions are something you can do in a frequency that adds a lot of value and insight, so everybody feels like they have a voice, rather than being more segregated or isolated across the organization or the team, however your team is constructed. So the one item I like is, so this 1+1 format basically is, let's talk about one item that you feel like the team can improve, and you're speaking individually. This is usually like a team leader, manager, to one of the test engineers, QA, it could be developer, however you want to structure it on the team, and have something objective. I think we could really improve on our velocity if we reduce the number of bugs that are found late in the cycle because we're really not doing a good milestone or environment promotion process. We're doing a lot of local testing. That's just an example. Well, how do we know the test runs versus defects? Having some good analytics, it's the kind of paradigm, maybe heard people say, you can't increase or lower the temperature in the room if you don't know what the temperature is, right? So we need some objective measure of where we're at, what the issue is, and then how can we adjust. Having some good tooling for analytics, like I have a screenshot below. This is like one of TestRail's like mini dashboards, gives you like ratio of defects, results and tests that have been executed, overall tests have been started. So it gives you a ratio of what's been run, what hasn't, what defects did we find, something like that you can use to be objective to then introduce in these 1+1 meetings, based on what people want to talk about or get better at. And then obviously we want to be positive too, right? One item that you feel the team excelled at. Maybe they don't want to talk about it in a team setting, or they don't have the opportunity based on location or time zone to even express this to team leadership. Talk about metrics, velocity, something measurable, and that's good. Subjective things are hard to track and measure and monitor. So one thing that is positive. And then the last thing is really what actions we feel we need to take to improve. The example I just mentioned, well, we're doing a lot of local testing instead of doing milestone promotion environment configuration locally doesn't match really what our environments are, and we're having a lot of misses. That could be something to take away. So having these meetings is a great way to do continuous improvement, and done these for a long time. It's a great mechanism if you're not doing them now. And the kind of last thing here is really focusing on upskilling. I know this is really one of the hardest things, actually, probably of anything that I mentioned on this webinar, is having focused time, not on your own, but during a sprint or during a given quarter, where team members can actually, what I call upskilling and prioritize learning. I always say this, it's actually free. So anybody in this call, if you're a TestRail user, your organization has a license or not, you can go to academy.testrail.com, and we actually have training modules for fundamentals of testing in TestRail, but we also have some topics like testing in regulated industries. This is a new module we added from my webinar in February. We talk about agile testing. There's a lot of things you can learn. It's all free. You can sign up. We give you a certificate whenever you complete it. So it's a great way to get some free continual learning. But having something that's measurable and having some objectives for your team members, or even for yourself, I think is critical. Having a certification, this quarter I want to get 2 testing certifications. Maybe you go in the TestRail Academy, and if you're in a regulated industry, you can take the online module and you can get your certificate. Course completion targets, skill-based assessments. Like I don't do this as much anymore, but doing like HackerRank or LeetCode, you can go on and test some of your coding skills and do some challenges. These things are all objective ways to make the team really upskill and not only perform better together, but individually. So So let's just talk about some key takeaways. And I know I have a couple questions already in the Q&A. So let's talk about just overall, what are some big feature or what are some big focus areas from the webinar today? Defining and enforcing team working agreements. That was like a common theme that I mentioned throughout this that really interweaves a lot of these concepts. Define it, work on it, iterate on it. It's going to be a living document. It's going to change, and ideally, it'll get better and help your team accelerate over time. Have a definition of done and have it aligned to the working agreement and kind of have that go full circle to the roles, responsibilities. Have a good objective definition of done so you know when work is complete. Better organize and track QA technical debt for the product backlog, right? And get engaged, do defect triage meetings. If your team's really having a lot of issues, think about the idea of treating automation and test artifacts like application code. Maybe create bugs for those. Get some visibility, roll that into a triage session. Managing environment claims. How do you manage and utilize your actual test environments to not hinder but accelerate your process to ensure high quality? Implement test case reviews and approvals. We should have high quality reviews on tests, just like we do for application code. And again, this comes back to the working agreement and definition of done and all the things that should kind of come full circle and work together. And then the last one here, have 1+1 meetings, take good reflection, make sure everybody has a voice so they can leverage everybody's thoughts to improve the team and get ideas together. And that really includes obviously upskilling. We just talked about that, getting better as a team, but also upskilling and working on individual skills. It's a great thing, great way to improve as a whole and individually. And people get a lot of value out of that. So we usually share this at the end of all of our webinars, but this basically is our resource link. I mentioned the TestRail Academy. We'll have links to that. Also, TestRail Enterprise, a couple of the screenshots we mentioned, and process tools and integrations that I showed specific to Enterprise, and you can review some of that. We also have some tutorials and integrations and stuff on YouTube. And again, if you're interested in a demo or learning anything additional with TestRail, we'll have links and resources that I'll include here as you're seeing at the end of the presentation. So yeah, thanks everybody for sticking around. Thank you again.